The Sun Devils might be a team that guys are going to overlook, but you can't overlook these guys. And these are the players that Oklahoma State should fear as we talk about them on this edition of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Thanks as always for tuning in. Wherever you're getting your podcast, make sure you hit like, subscribe, turn on those notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day, by the way, and a shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. If you want to stay in touch with that content, you can follow me on Twitter at RichieBrads36 and the podcast as well at LO_Sun Devils. Now, on today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about some players that Oklahoma State should fear heading into this game. And what I say by fear is guys that they can't overlook, guys that they need to make sure they account for on every single play, know where these players are, and make sure that they have a game plan for them. And quite frankly, there's quite a few Sun Devils here that I had a hard time kind of deciding who should be where. This is initially going to be a top 5 list, but I decided to actually break it down with offensive guys, defensive guys, and some potential wild card guys as well. So there's really quite a few Sun Devils on here that I think you should really make sure that you account for and don't necessarily let them kind of run wild and free on you, because there's guys on offense and defense that if Oklahoma State does not take seriously, they can end up ruining some game plans and really making the Cowboys pay. So let's go ahead and take a look at the offensive side first. Now, obviously, Jaden Rashada is the first guy that they should take a look at and make sure that they game plan for. I don't have him necessarily listed here because there's weapons that they need to account for. There are actual players that aren't going to touch the ball in every single play like Jaden Rashada is, that the Pokes need to account for. So looking at, I've got 4 guys listed here. We'll go ahead and start at the top. Jalin Conyers. This is the most explosive player on the offense. This is probably the best player on offense. Conyers is a big bully. And last week, he only played one half against Southern Utah. Not 100% sure why that was the case, but he was practicing this week. He should be full and good to go for the game on Saturday in Tempe. He is just such a weapon, and he is such a game changer for someone with his size and somebody who can move the way he does. He's a run after catch monster. He's somebody that is really able to just kind of suction cup all of the passes that are thrown his way. It feels like he's a very reliable pass catcher and somebody who can really just, again, with that run after catch, is someone that can really make you pay, whether he's making guys miss in open space or he's just running you over. You have to make sure that this is like the number one guy that you take a look at, more so than any other player, because there's so many different things that he can do for you. Now, with that being said, you'd be remiss if you didn't talk about the two number 1 receivers that the Sun Devils have on the outside. So next up, Elijhah Badger and Xavier Guillory. Looking at those two, man, they do a lot of things for you. With Badger, you have a true solidified, established number 1 receiver. Badger is the do-it-all. You just get him the ball, and he's going to find a way to produce and make plays when he gets any and all opportunities for the team. I look at Badger as somebody who can really open up this offense and take some stuff deep, but also be able to convert the first downs. Or maybe you get him the ball near or behind the line of scrimmage and allow him to create with his legs and with his athleticism and his ability to be that number 1 receiver for you. But then you look at Guillory as well. And he's like, I'm not even going to call him like discount Elijhah Badger, because quite frankly, he could be the number 1 receiver here. He is that good. He showed that off in week 1 where he caught 5 passes, where he caught a 47-yard touchdown, where he was able to create separation at the top of his routes and be able to take them deep. And if Rashada hits some of those deep balls in the second half, he has a very good chance to go over the century mark. Guillory was everything as advertised, and then even a little bit more. I look at Guillory as such a great number 2 receiver that he truly could be the number 1 if Badger was not here. And heck, maybe by the end of the year, he is. Like, he is that dynamic of a player. When you've got those two on the outside, it's such a who are we going to focus more problem for the defense. And then you throw in Jalin Conyers, and it's like you have 3 of the best pass catching options that the Sun Devils have had in the last like 5 years. Like, I look at these Sun Devil teams as of late, and like you had teams where Ricky Pearsall was the number 1 receiver. And like this isn't any offense to Ricky Pearsall. I really liked Ricky Pearsall. He's just not a number 1. You look at the Frank Darby's of the world, and like Badger and Guillory are just so far ahead of those other guys. You have them both at the same time too. So for the Pokes and the Cowboys, you cannot just overlook these kind of players. You have to understand that if you don't focus a lot of your attention on these guys, they're going to make you pay. So definitely have them as kind of like 2A, 2B here. And then finally, Cameron Skattebo. Skattebo was as advertised against the Sun Devils. He was over 100 scrimmage yards. He scored a touchdown. He could have had 2 touchdowns. He was a great pass catcher. He was a great runner between the tackles, outside the tackles. Just get him the football and allow him to create with his legs and his ability to make guys miss in open space and run guys over. He is all of that and a bag of peanuts for this team. So for the Sun Devils, they're going to want to get him the football as often as possible, especially if the passing game, God forbid, is not able to get going again. You want to know that you're going to be able to rely on somebody in the ground game that can get you those tough yards. Last year for the Sun Devils, ex-Valladay was one of those guys for the team that was able to really kind of generate yards when the Sun Devils offense was struggling. And Skattebo could potentially be that guy for you. We talked about him in the offseason. We previewed him as that kind of player. And in the first game of the season, he looks like that kind of player. He had a 24-yard reception. He had a handful of chunk yards on the ground. Like, he is just able to produce for you in more ways than one. And when you have a guy like that, you look at the Cowboys defense, and they gotta say to themselves, and they need to identify that this is one of the most important players for the Sun Devils offense, because they're going to rely so much on what Skattebo can bring for them. Skattebo is going to be one of the key pieces of this offense to make sure that if the passing game is not able to get going, that the Sun Devils are still going to be able to move the ball in one way or another. Skattebo is going to be the catalyst for that kind of production, that kind of overall feeling, I guess, of what the offense can do. So when it comes to offensive guys, you got to look out for Conyers. You got to look out for the 2 number 1 receivers on the outside. And of course, you have to take seriously the threat of Cameron Skattebo out of the backfield. Look, guys, if you are looking at building a championship team, right, you got to make sure that all of the right parts fit, and it has to be perfect. And when it comes to your vehicle, every part needs to fit just right as well. So the next time you need parts and accessories, go to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage, look for that green check to make sure that the part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. When you shop on eBay Motors, you need that confidence as well. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, 122 million, you did hear me right, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. We're back. Thank you all, as always, for tuning in. Wherever you get your podcast, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you get an update whenever we post new content. And of course, this week we will be continuing to preview the Oklahoma State game that is kicking off on Saturday. Hopefully you guys will show up for the blackout on 7:30 local time for the Sun Devils in Tempe. All right, let's flip the script. Go to the defensive side of the ball. Look, there's not necessarily a lot of guys that are like massive game changers, at least not as of right now. In week 1 against Southern Utah, they didn't generate any turnovers. They didn't get any sacks. They gave up some chunk plays. Like, this is a defense that is still trying to get its footing underneath them. And they're still a team that's trying to figure out their identity. Are they going to be a really big pass rush team? Are they going to be quality in coverage? Are they going to be a unit that is taking some time to adjust and a unit that maybe isn't the best? Like, we're still trying to figure that out. However, there's still 3 guys in particular that I wanted to highlight for these Sun Devils. We'll go ahead and start. My number 1 guy might surprise you. It's BJ Green. The reason why is BJ Green is just such a dynamic pass rusher for you. And he's somebody that can play on the edge, which is where we've seen him get so much of his work. But they can also kick him inside the tackle because that's where he played his first 2 seasons at Arizona State. And especially if, like, you were looking at like a depleted unit again on the defensive interior because you were missing Anthony Cooper and you were missing CJ Fight last week, although Fight was practicing this week and could potentially be in the folds. We'll wait and see. But with BJ Green, you've got a guy who can flex around the defensive front and somebody that has shown that he has the ability to get after the passer and bring the guy down. So BJ Green at the top of my list. Not so much because he's the best player on this defense, but because he could be a game wrecker. And if he is able to get going, he could be a multi-sack guy at any point during the year. So for the Cowboys, they need to know where number 35 is at all times, whether he's on the outside, whether he's on the interior. You need to identify where he is. He's the most proven pass rusher. He's the most consistent pass rusher. Yes, he didn't get any sacks in week 1. He did have a shoestring tackle on the Southern Utah quarterback, who I can't remember his name. He was also able to get into the backfield a handful of times, just couldn't get a sack. But I do believe in him to nonetheless be one of the more important players for the Sun Devils pass rush and one of the more important players for the defense. Like I said, the Pokes need to know where number 35 is at all times. But of course, you have to look out for the best player on this defense, which of course is Torrence. With Torrence, you have an absolute eraser at the cornerback spot. Somebody who can take your number 1 receiver and wipe them out from a game plan. He's a big dude. He's a talented dude. He's a fluid dude with his hips, somebody who can mirror and match. He does everything for you at the corner spot. He is the firm, established number 1 guy. Somebody who, if the Cowboys don't take seriously, might be able to take their number 1 receiver away, whoever that might be. I have not done my homework on Oklahoma State just yet. I've been, making sure that I'm still on top of the Sun Devils. That will come between tomorrow and Friday as I continue to preview the game this week. But with Torrence, as we all know by now, he is just so talented. And again, he's somebody who can just mirror and match with whoever is unfortunately lined up across from him. So for the Cowboys, they need to know where number 9 is simply because they might not want to throw at him. He might be able to just wipe away whatever their number 1 option is. And if that's the case, then you might want to just flat out not throw at him. He's not necessarily like elite ball skills. He only had 1 interception last year, but he doesn't necessarily need them when you're just not going to throw at him. You're just not going to throw at him. Like, he is just that talented of a player that you really just don't want to give him any opportunities to intercept the football, to make deflections on the football. Just know where number 9 is. Identify him at the beginning of the play, before the snap, and then figure out, like, maybe we take a shot, but probably shouldn't take a shot. And then the last guy that I have here is Dashaun Mallory. Mallory had a really sneaky quality first game for the Sun Devils. I believe he had 4 tackles for the team. Nothing out of this world in terms of production, but he was somebody that really navigated the defensive line well. And he was one of the reasons why they were so stout against the run. They were holding Southern Utah well under 4 yards a carry. They might have been under 3 yards a carry. And part of that's because number 98 was able to do so much from the defensive interior. He's also so important in terms of leadership. You look at Dashaun Mallory as somebody who has really just embraced that role in his first and only year with the Sun Devils, unless he has more eligibility. Because again, I can't keep up with that stuff. But what he was able to do in week one should show you a preview of what he could possibly do for the remainder of the season. He is just a very stout defender. He's somebody that can anchor the defensive line, somebody who is able to do more things than one for you. I don't know if he's necessarily somebody who gets in the backfield for a sack or multiple sacks, but I do look at him as somebody who can wipe away any kind of run game that's being put against him, somebody who can hold his own, and somebody who can keep the linebackers' jerseys clean. So for the Cowboys offense, you want to know where number 35 is from a pass rushing standpoint. You want to know where number 9 is from a coverage standpoint. And then you need to understand that number 98 is going to be able to lead these guys. He's going to be able to be disruptive. Goodness gracious. Out of the backfield, and somebody who could potentially help his guys on the defensive line to be able to do a lot of damage in this game that maybe you wouldn't think otherwise they might be able to do. One more time, thanks as always for tuning in wherever you get those podcasts. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications, because we are Monday through Friday free and available on all platforms. And of course, thanks to my everydayers who are here every day. Some wild cards for you. I've got 5 guys here that the reason why I have them as wild cards is because they're not necessarily like the top guys at their position, but they are guys who could sneak up on you. Guys that you want to make sure that when they're on the field, you don't take them for granted and you don't overlook them. We'll go ahead and start at the top of my list, which is DeCarlos Brooks. He was dynamite in his first game for the Sun Devils. 12 carries for 63 yards with a long of 17. He also caught a pass for 11 yards. He did that as a number 2 running back. Like, Cameron Skattebo through and through was the number 1, but then number 25 comes out onto the field, and he's able to make a big-time difference with the way that he runs the football and the way that they used him. They lined him up at fullback, and they just gave him the ball on dives, and he was getting 5-6 yards a carry. Like, he was so, what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily electric, but very efficient when he got the football. And this is somebody that, if the Sun Devils are going to be heavily reliant on their run game again, you need to understand that just because number 3, Cameron Skattebo, is coming off the field, doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to have a decrease in production. DeCarlos Brooks proved that he can be not necessarily a starting running back, but somebody who is like just a very, very good guy to spell the number 1 running back. So with DeCarlos Brooks, if this run game is able to get going for the Sun Devils, the Cowboys need to know that, again, like I said, just because number 3 is off the field doesn't mean that number 25 is going to be a significant downplay in terms of production, in terms of talent. Got to understand the Sun Devils have a lot of talent in the backfield. Those two can really make you pay. Also want to talk about D Ford on the outside. He wasn't necessarily the best player on the field during his first game, right? There was a really big pass that he gave up during the second half that thankfully was ultimately wiped out by a targeting penalty, but he was still able to chase that ball down, and he had some good coverage throughout the game. He was really flexible too. They played him on the outside a lot, and he's someone who can move into the inside as well as a smaller 5'9" corner. That's where he might be more comfortable playing, but the Sun Devils weren't afraid to use him on the outside. He's somebody that you're just going to be able to use throughout the defense, throughout the secondary. And with that in mind, like, Torrence is through and through the number 1 corner, but that doesn't mean that you suddenly can't look at the guy across from him. And the Sun Devils have depth there too. You've got Ed Woods, you got Mason Williams. There are guys to worry about here for the Pokes. And just because D Ford had I wouldn't even call it an up and down game. Like, for the most part, he had a very strong performance. The Cowboys need to understand that he's no slouch, and he's somebody who can still do a lot of things for the Sun Devils. One more guy I want to talk about, and then I have two honorable mentions here, is Melcon Stovall. Stovall only had one catch, but it was a 33-yard reception towards the beginning of the game to set the Sun Devils up in great field position for a touchdown. He is somebody that I think is going to end up sneaking up on a lot of teams this year. During training camp, number 7 was somebody who kept showing up and kept flashing and really caught my attention to the point where I was kind of thinking to myself, like, he might seriously be like the number 4 receiver here, but he's a really, really good number 4 receiver. If he is able to continue building upon what he was able to do last week, the Sun Devils might have themselves unbelievable depth at the wide receiver position. And Stovall is going to be one of those guys who is really just a big-time playmaker for the Sun Devils, especially because he's not necessarily going to be out there for all the snaps. You're going to have Badger and Guillory out there for 90+% of plays, but then number 7 will rotate in. Or, you'll have Giovanni Sanders that comes out. Troy O'Mary caught a touchdown last week. He's going to find some time on the field as well. There's lots of receivers here, but you can't overlook Melcon Stovall. He's one of the last guys here. And then 2 honorable mentions. They're only mentioned simply because I don't know if they're going to play or not, but you got to look out for Jordan Tyson and TJ Fight if they are going to be on the football field. Jordan Tyson, somebody I am very high on. Like, if you guys watched any of the podcast over the summer during the offseason, you would know that Jordan Tyson's one of my dudes. If he is able to get onto the football field, this is a guy that can take the top off the defense. He is an elite deep threat. He's also somebody that can contribute on special teams as a punt returner. He had an 80+ yard punt return against the Sun Devils last year for Colorado. He can affect a team in more ways than one, and he can beat you in more ways than one. So the Cowboys need to know that if number 0 is on the field, you got to prepare for him. And then, of course, CJ Fight, another dude that I'm really high on. Somebody that is a true defensive interior guy, somebody who's really disruptive. He's so big, he's so strong, he's so physical. And if the Sun Devils are able to get him and Dashaun Mallory together on the defensive line, you're going to have a really good unit. And you're going to have guys who could be very disruptive and find a way to make life absolute hell for the Pokes. Getting CJ Fight back would be such a boon for this defense. And I'm really hoping that number 99 is able to get onto the field. I'm kind of leaning towards he should be able to get out there, but maybe he's still a week away from whatever he's recovering from. But those are the guys that I'm saying the Cowboys need to be worried about. Plenty of guys on offense, some guys on defense, and some wild cards as well that they need to make sure they don't take for granted. Who do you think is going to absolutely torch the Cowboys this weekend? Who are guys that you're going to be paying extra attention to? Let me know in the comments. Let me know on Twitter at RichieBrats36 or the podcast at LO_Sun Devils. But as always, thanks for tuning in. And wherever you get those podcasts, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I appreciate everyone for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day. And I appreciate my everydayers who are here every day. I will see you guys tomorrow for more content covering the game this week. Till then, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun.